Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffin coming at you again with another APUSH video. This is going to be our final video on topic 8.8, the Vietnam War. Now, when we last left off, we talked about how Richard Nixon will be inheriting the Vietnam War from his predecessor, Lyndon Johnson, and will be implementing Vietnamization, and this will include a slow drawdown on American troops, though expanding the war into Cambodia. We also saw, of course, as the war has expanded, and the unearthing of the My Lai massacre, amongst other things, we're going to see continued precipitous dropping of support for the war in Vietnam. And as if the war was not already unpopular enough, we then see the release of the Pentagon Papers. Now, the Pentagon Papers are going to be a series of classified documents that will be stolen by Daniel Ellsberg and will be given to the New York Times. Now, what these documents will show is that as early as the mid-1960s, the Johnson administration knew that we were not winning in Vietnam. Despite what the White House was telling the public, we were not winning the war. And it did not look like we would be able to win the war. But nonetheless, we would tell the White House would tell the American public that we just needed few more months, few thousand more soldiers. We're going to win this thing. But knowing that that was going to be a lie, that we were not really going to win this. So the idea being is, why did we continue fighting? Well, the basic gist of it was that we did not want to admit what would be a humiliating defeat, losing to basically Vietnamese peasants. So understand that through the bulk of this conflict, these documents are going to prove that the American government knew that we were losing the war and knowingly lied to the public about it, and therefore allowing for tens of thousands of American soldiers to die needlessly, and of course the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese. Now, when the New York Times is getting ready to publish these documents, the Nixon administration will find out, and as you can imagine, the Nixon administration did not want this going public because this would only make an already unpopular war even more unpopular. So he will sue the New York Times, alleging that the newspaper did not have the ability to print what was classified information due to the fact that it was stolen. However, the Supreme Court in the case of New York Times versus U.S. is going to rule that even though the documents were obtained illegally, that the freedom of the press is so important, it is so significant that you cannot just engage in prior restraint like this, in other words, preemptive censoring, just because it might be politically unpopular. That, there are certain things like knowing when the government is, clearly lying to you, that it supersedes the ways by which that information was garnered. So, and as expected, when the Pentagon Papers articles go public in the Times, the American people's support for the war drops even more. Now, all the while the Vietnamization is happening, we are seeing some attempts to try to negotiate a peace with the North Vietnamese. But these negotiations are going to be stalled for a significant amount of time. There's going to be bickering, there's going to be arguing, even as juvenile as, an inability to even agree on the size and the shape of the table by which they were going to be negotiating at. In many respects, this is going to be seen as stalling tactics mostly done by the communists out of a sense that they knew that they were winning. They knew that they were, making progress. However, they did not like that Nixon was going to, once again, reinstall massive bombing of North Vietnam. This is going to be this Christmas bombing that's going to be taking place in late 1972. And this, renewed massive bombing of North Vietnamese cities will kind of be the final thing that brings the communists to the negotiating table. And in 1973, a ceasefire agreement will be signed by the U.S. and the North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese governments. And as a result of this ceasefire, Nixon's going to be able to kind of proclaim that we have achieved, as his campaign promised, peace with honor. The war is over and South Vietnam has not fallen. Now, some important details of this ceasefire to keep in mind is that with the ceasefire, the U.S. is now going to formally remove all remaining troops. We are done in Vietnam. We are walking away. Now, that being said, just because we walk away, that doesn't mean that South Vietnam security is going to be guaranteed. In fact, far from it. And you don't really have to be a genius to figure out that once the communists in the north and the VC in the south realize that the United States will not be there to defend South Vietnam, that it's just gonna, not gonna be long before the communists decide to reinvade, and they will. Within a year and a half, we will see communist forces reinvade South Vietnam, and without the United States to defend the country, South Vietnamese forces are going to very, very quickly be defeated, give up territory. They will fall back to the capital of Saigon. They cannot defend the city. And, within a matter of days, the capital of South Vietnam is going to see a mass evacuation. The last American stronghold standing will be the U.S. Embassy. And for those South Vietnamese that had colluded with the Americans during the conflict, the fact that the communists were now going to be taking over was an unbelievably scary thing. And so for many of these folks, they believed that if they did not get out from the American embassy, that they were going to be arrested and they were going to be killed. So you saw, as you can see pictured here, chaos in the attempt to try to flee the country. And we will see round-the-clock helicopters leaving from the roof of the U.S. Embassy to try to get mostly American diplomats and security out of the embassy, though taking some refugees with them. But it will be an absolute mess. It'll be a calamity. North Vietnamese troops will eventually claim the embassy itself, and this will be an utterly embarrassing, if not shameful, end to this conflict in Vietnam. And as a result, Vietnam finally, after decades, will become a unified country, a unified communist country, with the capital of what was South Vietnam, Saigon, now being renamed in honor of the man that represented Vietnamese independence and communist Vietnamese independence, Ho Chi Minh. So the war is over, and we lost. At the end of the day, the plan to protect South Vietnam from falling to communism will not be achieved. What many historians will basically admit as being America's first ever true loss in a war. And what will it cost us? Well, it's going to cost millions of Vietnamese lives. NVA, VC, and civilians. 3 million. On the American side, you are talking about 300,000 plus casualties. Hundreds of thousands of men injured or killed in the conflict, traumatized, specifically 58,000 Americans killed. Remember, the average age of an American soldier in Vietnam was 19. So, most of these folks that died were teenagers, technically. It's going to cost us, and no, you are not imagining this, $150 billion to try to fight in Vietnam that will basically, go for nothing. And that was money that could have been spent on Johnson's Great Society programs, but were never fulfilled. But perhaps the biggest cost of all was to our sense of confidence. This would be a devastating blow to who we thought we were. We thought we were the greatest country in the history of the world, but we had now been defeated by Vietnamese peasants. We were not able to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. In fact, we're going to see Laos and Cambodia eventually fall to communism, which will, basically, prove the domino theory to be correct to some degree. The question, that we now face is, can we really be viewed as a superpower anymore? Are we still the great defender of liberty that we once claimed to be? Now, there's also going to be some important legislative effects from the war. One of these will be the ratification of the 26th Amendment, which will now allow 18-year-olds to be able to vote. Prior to this war, in basically every state, you had to be 21 years of age. But during the war, this was seen as problematic because you could be 18 years old, sent over via the draft to go fight and die in Vietnam, and not have the ability to legally choose those people that sent you over there. So out of a sense of clear hypocrisy, there was a fight to try to get that voting age lowered, and that's what will happen with the 26th Amendment. We will also see, following the war, the end of the military draft. The draft was so unpopular, so divisive, that not only was the draft ended in the mid-70s, it's never returned. It's been now, almost 50 years since we've had a military draft, and short of an outright invasion of the United States, probably not likely to see one in the future. Another key effect will be the passage of the War Powers Act. Now, you may recall that the war in Vietnam, in terms of its being seen as perceived as a real conflict, will be happening following the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which is going to, if you recall, will give President Johnson pretty much a blank check to be able to dictate things like troop levels and be able to dictate funding for the war and things like that. Well, now, because of the failures in Vietnam and the failures of that policy, Congress is going to be moving to take some of those powers back. And with the War Powers Act, it now says that if the president wishes to send troops overseas for military purposes, to go fight, that they must notify Congress within 48 hours. And once those troops have been sent over, the clock is ticking. Once that happens, the president now has 90 days to actually get formal approval by Congress to keep those troops fighting. Now, note, presidents have followed the law, but every president since, and including Nixon, believes that that law is unconstitutional because it infringes on the president's constitutional commander-in-chief powers. But note, all right, when we do talk about, the end of this war, we're going to learn some very clear lessons about how a war should be fought in the future. At least, that there was that assumption. But understand that, at the end of the day, this war will have a very transformative effect on how we view government, how we view the military, how we view the containment policy, and just in general what our cultural values are. So anyhow, we will leave it there for today, and that brings a conclusion to the Vietnam War. We'll see you next time.